Chapter 6. An old dragon rears its ugly head. Joseph saw the old man who had been beaten several times a day at the hospital, changing his bandages and bringing him meals. There was something about the man that exuded dignity and commanded respect. Joseph always treated him kindly and asked after his needs. Initially, the old man had great difficulty walking due to the injuries he had received. Though it wasn't part of his job, Joseph would support him as he took faltering steps around the room. One evening after supper, Joseph came to collect the dishes and found the man somewhat wistfully gazing through the window. "Tell me, Father," said the young man, "would you enjoy a walk to the garden to enjoy the evening air?" The old man's eyes lit up, and he smiled a sad smile as he nodded his assent. "Let me take these crocks to the kitchen," replied Joseph, "and then I'll be back for you." A few moments later, Joseph returned, helped the older man to his feet, and supported him as they slowly shuffled out the door and into the garden. As they slowly progressed, their heads close together, Joseph whispered, "Can you keep a secret, Father?" The old man looked at him with a faint twinkle in his eye and whispered back, "I'm quite good at keeping secrets." Then he smiled. "I'm afraid it won't be just the two of us in the garden," Joseph explained. He felt the man stiffen slightly before he gave him a reassuring squeeze on the arm. "Don't be alarmed," he continued. "We will be joined by a young woman who I think you will find delightful. I know I find her most alluring. I must confess to you that I haven't made my feelings about her known to the brothers in the hospital. I'm not sure how they will react. They expect me to take vows and join the order, but I'm not convinced that's what God wants me to do." Joseph wondered to himself why he felt comfortable telling the old man this, but he continued anyway. "It's not the vow of poverty that concerns me. I've pretty much got that down by now," he said with a light laugh. "I have to confess, however, that the vow of chastity doesn't appeal to me at all. Although I'm pretty certain that some of the brothers don't take that too seriously themselves." The two men exchanged a look and chortled softly. Frigga was waiting for them in the garden. Although her physical recovery was pretty much complete, the monks at the hospital had been in no hurry to dismiss her, at least up to this point in time. Space in the hospital was becoming an issue, however, and she knew it was only a matter of time before they asked her to leave. She still cherished her evening conversations with Joseph in the garden, and while Joseph hadn't told the monks about his feelings for her, it was perhaps the worst-kept secret in the entire hospital. As a result, the monks never interrupted their conversations. Tonight, however, the two of them were joined by the older man who was still recovering from his injuries. Joseph had mentioned him to Frigga on numerous occasions, and she was mystified by whom the man might be. As the two men stepped into the cool of the garden, Frigga's eyes widened slightly, and she spoke. "Good evening, Herr Geldmann." "Ah, good evening, Frau Frigga," replied the elderly man. "What a surprise to find you here." Joseph stared open-mouthed at the old man and the young woman before blurting out, "You mean the two of you know each other?" Smiling, the older man replied, "We have known each other for some time. Young Frigga here was the wife of the former proprietor of the Gasthaus Greifen. I always admired Frigga, although, as she can tell you, my dealings with her husband were not always pleasant. My sincere condolences nonetheless on the passing of your husband, But I thought you had left Rothenburg for Würzburg. Thank you for your kind words, Herr Geldmann, Frege replied. I did indeed leave town, but was attacked by thieves on the road to Würzburg. I will not trouble you with the horrific details of that misadventure, but as a result of the attack, I ended up here at the hospital. But wait, sputtered Joseph, looking at the older man. Who are you? And exactly how did the two of you know each other? Oh, Joseph, chuckled Frigga, they really don't let you out of the hospital grounds much, do they? I forget how isolated this place is from the rest of the town. Herr Geldmann is the most prominent banker in all of Rothenburg. Anyone who does business in town knows him, and probably owes him money. You're a banker? Stammered Joseph. I knew from your clothing that you were no ordinary beggar from the street. But who attacks a prominent banker on the streets of Rothenburg? The banker raised an eyebrow and responded in a weary but friendly voice. Surely you know that Christians are forbidden from charging interest on money loaned. They call it usury. So, in addition to being a banker, I am also... A Jew, exclaimed the wide-eyed Joseph. Geldmann smiled a wry smile and continued. Indeed I am, and that is not always a popular thing to be in this town. It appears that the old dragon of anti-Semitism has reared its ugly head again. I wasn't robbed that night in town. I was simply beaten because I am a Jew, and because I've enjoyed a degree of success that the men who attacked me will never know. Those who lashed out at me, however, were merely the fist holding the rod. They were inspired by others. Of course, they couldn't stop themselves from relieving me of my possessions. That is simply the kind of people they are. Seeing that Joseph was having trouble understanding, the elderly banker sat on a garden bench and gestured to the two younger people to sit as well. Let me explain something to you that you may not know or understand. This will not be a short tale, however. Joseph, perhaps you could prevail upon the good brothers to spare us a few tankards of their most excellent ale before we proceed. As Joseph went to make arrangements for their tankards of ale, Frigga and Geldmann sat in silence for a moment before Frigga spoke. I'm afraid I have an idea about what you're going to tell him, she said quietly. It's an old story, and I'm afraid a new chapter is about to be written. One hears things when spending as much time in the common room of the inn as I have. The old Jew nodded slowly. Wine and beer tend to loosen tongues that would otherwise be a bit more circumspect. But you're right. It's an old story that never seems to change. I wonder if it ever will. But let us wait for your friend to rejoin us before we speak more about this. It is not the kind of story I enjoy telling any more than I have to. This time it was Frigga who nodded in silence. She could well imagine that what the older man had to say was not something that came easily to him. Geldmann broke the silence with a question of a completely different nature. What will you do, Frigga, when you are released from the care of the brothers here at the hospital? Frigga smiled ruefully and replied, You ask a most troubling and important question, Herr Geldmann. I have no family here. I have neither home nor possessions. I will certainly be regarded with suspicion at best. I have no idea how I shall support myself. What about your friend Joseph? Asked the old man. I may be old, but I'm not blind. I can see the sparks between the two of you. It's obvious that Joseph is not cut out for the brotherhood. Tell me if I'm wrong. Frigga held a hand to her mouth in a vain attempt to stifle a laugh. "Is it so obvious as all that?" she chortled. "I thought we had rather been the epitome of discretion." Although she blushed slightly, her eyes danced as she spoke. Geldman laughed softly in return and said, "Oh, Frigga, there may be frost on my roof where the shingles have not blown away, but that doesn't mean I have never known the warmth of a hearth. I have known what it is like to be in love. My dear wife, Sarah, may God rest her soul, was my deepest delight." They were both still for a moment, each lost in their thoughts. Then Geldman continued, "But as delightful as love may be, it doesn't, by itself, put a roof over your head or food on your table. Supposing that Joseph tells the brothers he is leaving, and that he wants to take you as a wife, where will you go? What will you do?" "You have hit the nail on the very head, Herr Geldmann. I have no place to go. The nunnery is no place for me, but who will hire me? And without money, who will give me a place to stay? The only job I've ever known was waiting tables and managing the kitchen at the inn." "Why not consider that again?" asked the old man. "I've kept my eyes and ears open, and I know for a fact that the Gasthof Greifen, now known as Haus der Nachtwächter, is busier than ever. Rumor has it that the new proprietors require help. Who better than someone who knows the business of the inn inside and out?" Casting her gaze at the ground, Frigga replied, "Oh, but Herr Geldmann, why would they hire me? I am the shamed wife of a known criminal. Besides, wouldn't that be awkward for the new proprietors to hire the one who worked at the inn before?" "I wouldn't write off the new proprietors of the inn," said the old man. "The man isn't exactly a person of noble birth or high standing. In fact, you know him. He's none other than Heinrich, the night watchman. He used to work for you. He's never been overly concerned about how others think of him. And from what I know, you treated him well when he worked for you. He hasn't forgotten that. And I believe you know his wife, Irmgard, as well." "Besides," Geldman continued with a wry smile, "we outcasts need to stick together. I know Heinrich well, and I will put in a good word for you. Ah, here's our friend Joseph, laden with tankards. Let us unburden him, and I shall get on with my story." After the tankards had been distributed, they all raised them, and the banker said softly, "L'chaim," adding quietly with a wink, "I hope that's acceptable in a Christian hospital." They all nodded and drank deeply before the banker began his tale. "It's never been easy to be a Jew in this land," he began. "In fact, it's never been easy to be a Jew anywhere or at any time. For centuries, my people have been driven from town to town, from land to land. Sometimes we prosper, but there always seems to come a day of reckoning. People, towns, and cities profit from our industriousness and our ability to make a business flourish. But at some point, that's not enough, and they begin to resent our success, even when it makes them wealthy in return. Even in Rothenburg," continued Geldmann, "Jews have settled in the past and helped build the town. My people have been a significant part of the Rothenburg community for hundreds of years. A few hundred years ago, Jews lived in the very middle part of town, the marketplace. They were a vital part of the community. But trouble surfaced." The banker took a long draught from his tankard before continuing. "In 1298, a man from Rotterdam, who wasn't even a citizen of Rothenburg, had turned a number of the townspeople against their Jewish neighbors, who were sometimes their friends. This man propagated a story about Jews who had stolen religious artifacts from Rothenburg's churches. There was, of course, he scoffed, no evidence to support the accusations, and no formal inquiry was ever undertaken. It didn't matter. This man managed to incite such a furor against the Jews that the citizens of Rothenburg killed some 450 of my people in retaliation. People of this town had murdered people who had been their friends and neighbors. The three sat in silence, mulling over what the banker had just said. Joseph and Frigga had both grown up hearing slights and accusations and hints of disapproval of the Jews. No one had ever told them about such acts of horror. They wondered if it could possibly be true, but somehow they knew that this was no manufactured fable. They'd seen how citizens were easily manipulated into ugly thoughts and actions. That wasn't the first incident of hostility against Jews in this town, continued the old man, nor was it the last. You have certainly heard of the horrific tales of the Black Plague, said the banker. Fortunately, Rothenburg was largely spared from the horrors of that plague from 1348 to 1349, but fear was not in short supply. People everywhere were wary, nervous, and on edge. There were too many horror stories about how whole cities had been decimated. Everyone in Rothenburg wondered if they would be next. Despite those fears and ominous reports, the Jews of Rothenburg prospered, even though some citizens cast doubtful glances at the chosen ones. And although the town had more or less escaped the devastation of the plague, fear had taken deep root. As had happened before in countless places, individuals who felt threatened by the success of the Jews began looking for opportunities to take advantage of them. The methods they employed to do so were strangely familiar. Although Frigga and Joseph were silent, they were still listening, their eyes fixed on the older man before them. Catching their eyes, he continued. A false rumor was started that the local Jews had poisoned Rothenburg's drinking water. Geldmann shook his head and said, no one seemed to consider the fact that the Jews drank from the same source of water as every other citizen of Rothenburg. But when fear is in full bloom, reason seldom seems to matter. People who are afraid only want to remove anything associated with the cause or the perceived cause of their fear. The result was predictable. Many Jews in Rothenburg were killed in an attempt to allay the fears of the general Gentile population. Frigga and Joseph sat without moving or speaking. It is not easy being told that the people who had been held up as examples for years were capable of such acts of unthinking and unthinkable cruelty. They simply stared at Geldmann. Tears ran down Frigga's cheeks. Joseph could barely meet the man's eyes. You may be wondering why I tell you these stories, said the old Jew. I fear that another such time of fear and distortion of truth is upon us. As I move about the town, I overhear hushed conversations that people think I don't notice. There is an underlying ugliness that is hard to explain. I hear people complaining in hushed voices about how the damned Jews are repossessing homes and businesses and forcing good Christian people out into the streets. It's true, the banker continued, that there are occasions when loans are not repaid. Those are rare events, but they do happen. No one seems to grasp that we loan people money when they couldn't find it anywhere else. We made the terms as clear as possible. And frankly, some people are simply poor managers of money or have no business sense whatsoever. We don't like having to do it, but the money gets reinvested in the town when we repossess a property. The ironic thing about it is that we Jews are prohibited from taking on other kinds of work. The Christians aren't allowed to lend money at interest, and we aren't allowed to be craftsmen or take on other positions. The result is they hate us for being the very thing they created us to be. I tell you this, my friends, though we have not known each other well or long, because I fear that the hatred against the Jews is about to boil over in Rothenburg once again. I know you to be good people, and I want you to be aware of the other side of the story. This is not the first time this hatred has reared its head. I foresee that it won't end for hundreds of years. For a time, the three of them sat in silence, hearing only the gentle stirring of the evening breeze through the trees. Their tankards were empty, their tongues tired, and their ears and hearts were full. Finally, the old banker spoke again. I thank you, my young friends, for hearing my tale. I know these are hard words to hear. Still, I ask you to take them to heart. I also ask you not to forget me, and I know that you will not. Go in peace. May your slumbers give you wisdom and insight for the days that are surely coming upon us. Good night, my friends.